This is the Be One Change One podcast, where our mission is to help listeners define values, practice integrity, and inspire change.
Our vision is to mentor men and empower them to achieve more by taking responsibility for shaping their own lives.
He's CAS, an evolving man who has been shaped by adversity and continues to grow through his imperfections.
And he's Roscoe, an imperfect work in progress that tries to suck less every day.
Between us, we have over 40 years of Air Force fighter pilot experience with countless hours as trainers, instructors, and mentors.
Join us and learn to take responsibility for your own life as we dive into subjects from leadership to resilience to vulnerability.
Be the one who changes their course. Be decisive, driven, and purposeful. Set the example for others. Lead. We wish we'd had this show when we were younger men.
Be the one. There we go.
All right, Cass got to push the button. Yeah. All right. Here's something we've never done before.
Yeah.
We've never read the same book at the same time and then debriefed it and talked about it.
Yeah.
So let's do that today.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to do today, y'all. Yeah. We're going to talk about the book Hidden Potential, The Science of Achieving Greater Things by Adam Grant, who's a New York Times bestselling author. He's had several other books too. So, and we decided to do this one because we talk about books a lot. We had one episode just where we recommended some books to folks. We thought that this might be a good way to go through some things and maybe inspire some listeners to, if you're starting to go through that self-inspection process, here's some things that you can look at. What I will say is it's almost the perfect balance. Like I think you and I often provide for one another in the sense that Roscoe, I think, prefers to read books that are a little more satirical, good stories, but kind of gets to the point and just is straightforward and kind of clear and precise in what they're getting at. Where I prefer books that are a little more technical or have a little more research based behind them. Not that I don't like the satirical ones as well, but I like to see the research behind what people are trying to say.
I wouldn't say satirical necessarily. I much prefer it when people just kind of write like they talk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not get too far into the weeds on the technical aspects of it. And like we were kind of joking about the different diagrams and all that kind of stuff in here, referencing research projects. And some of that's kind of cool, but at the same time, I don't really care.
Sure.
And now I would venture to guess that a lot of people are like that.
Well, and that's my point in saying this. So if you're one of those people that prefers a book more in like Roscoe does, then this may not be the book for you. If you like something that's a little more technical and has a little more research behind it, then this may be a good book to start with. So anyways, we're going to talk about it. The other reason that we wanted to do this too is because Roscoe and I are retired fighter pilots. We're really good at killing things and killing people and blowing things up. We're not experts in a lot of these fields in the discussions that we talk about, other than the fact that we've experienced a bunch of this stuff and we've found what works for us in our own lives, right? And the books that we've read and the research that we've done on our own. And so this helps us kind of validate some of the stuff that we're talking about because we're reading these people that are supposed, quote unquote experts in the field who have studied this stuff and done research on this stuff. And you're going to see, and we're going to talk about like some of the parallels that exist between what this guy talks about in his book and how similar it is to the things that we talk about on the podcast. So,
no, it wasn't a bad read. And I don't want people to think that, I'm poo-pooing on Hidden Potential by Adam Grant. I'm not. It's one of those things where, I've been doing this for a few years now and I've read so many of these books that I kind of just want to cut to the chase and get to it. If it's not going to be entertaining, then let's just get to the meat and potatoes of it. And that's why one of the things that I really liked about this book, you don't find this in a lot of these, is in the back of it, he puts he calls it actions for impact.
Yeah, like the last quarter of the book.
Yeah. It's a summary of the chapters. And I really appreciated that for a guy like me who, I can thumb to this and you can see that my sticky notes stopped at about page 50 or so because I was like, okay, fuck, it's all the same crap. We're going to talk about character. We're going to talk about motivation and growth and all that, comfort zones and all that shit. But I can flip back here and I can hit the high points of every chapter as kind of a reminder.
Yeah.
So I appreciated that. So structurally, I thought that he laid it out pretty good. 3 parts. First part's character. Second part's pretty much motivation and shit. And the third part is kind of it's bigger picture.
Yeah, it's more organization driven. Yeah. It's systems of opportunity is how he describes it, but it's really more organizational stuff. And so for the podcast,
There's a good one. Figure that one out.
We're going to focus more on the kind of the first two sections of the book, which were skills of character and then what he calls structures for motivation.
So what I think happened and this is on page 157, Every Child Gets Ahead is the name of the chapter. He's got an x-axis and a y-axis for his little graph that he's got going on here. And it's a curved graph with a bunch of different countries, but it looks like he just grabbed a handful of pubic hair and threw it on there and then traced the outlines of it. Does it? It's
a little bit.
So I don't give a shit about that kind of stuff, right? Because I don't interpret data that way. I would much rather have somebody tell me a story.
Yeah.
Kind of cavemanish, paint the shit on the wall of the cave and tell me that.
Yeah. We'll bring finger paints next time, Roscoe.
Yeah, seriously. I should have been a Marine, man. We need a box of crayons to go over here by John Cena.
Done.
So Adam Grant, he's a PhD dude. He went to Harvard. He's like wicked smart, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's why a lot of this was, I don't want to say I put up a barrier immediately, but I would much rather have an author who's closer to my level.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a PhD and I didn't go to Harvard and I've only been doing this for a few years. And my point in saying all that is, for the listeners, Hidden Potential is a good book. If I were going to recommend a self-help book to get you started on doing some of this stuff, it probably wouldn't be this one, just because of those technicalities.
Yeah.
I would recommend something a little more anecdotal, paints with a little bit more of a broad brush. And then eventually, if you want to get some of the nitty-gritty details, you can go to a book like this.
Yeah.
That'd be my only.
Yeah, I think it's a good tweener because it is technical in spots. I think he has some really good stories in it that he uses to amplify the points that he's trying to make. It can get wordy in spots, but I don't think it's, you have to understand too, like people that go through that PhD process and have to write dissertations, like when you start to write in that academic vein, it kind of sticks with you. It's hard to break out of. It's not as technical as some of the other books that I've read, like Emotional Intelligence, which was basically like reading a dissertation.
Yeah, fuck that.
But yeah, so I think it's a good in-betweener. If you're somebody who kind of likes the technical aspect, but you don't want to get overwhelmed by it, it's good. But again, too, the last section of it's written more kind of for specifically towards like organizations and things like that. So anyways.
Yeah, well, let's get into it.
Yeah, let's dive into it, man.
Yeah.
So let's start with, we're just going to talk through that first section, skills of character. And we don't have to go line by line, but what stood out to you?
Well,
anything in particular?
So you can see my sticky notes started up to about page 50 here and then kind of ended because it's a lot of the same stuff that we talk about, but there are some good nuggets in here, man. And I think when you read a lot of these, like I read a book recently where I think I underlined 2 sentences in the whole book as what I would call new information or things that I would go back to that book for. But there are a lot of those in this book. I would say he has some good things. And we've talked about character quite a bit and values and related the two. And so there's a little section here starts on about page 20-ish and goes for a couple of pages. But his definition of character that he puts in here, character is your capacity to prioritize your values over your instincts.
Yep.
And I thought that kind of goes back to when we were talking about character. I referenced a Tony Dungy quote where he was talking about doing the right thing no matter what the outcome is.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of, I think you can get a lot out of that definition because we are hardwired for some actions and reactions through to our reptilian brain and our brainstem and all that bullshit. Right. But at the same time, character is what gives us that space that Viktor Frankl talks about.
Yeah.
And we introduce some of those morals and those codes that we live by, and those could be interpreted as your values, or at least you could insert those into that gap and help you make those decisions.
Yeah, it's hilarious. So just for the ones out there, just so you guys know, like Roscoe and I did not talk while we read this book. This is the first time we're talking about it.
That's true.
Dude, you stopped on the very first thing that I stopped on, which is hilarious, right? Because my first set of notes is, which I thought this was a really good distinction. And I don't know if we've necessarily defined it, I think, as clearly as he did in the book. But he talks about the difference between personality and character.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's talking about that character's often confused with personality, but that they're actually not the same, right? Your personality is a predisposition.
He says personality is not your destiny, it's your tendency.
Yeah, it's your tendencies, right? Yeah. So it's your basic instinct for how you think, how you feel, how you act, how you respond to things, right?
Yeah.
And character was, like you said, it's your capacity to prioritize values over instincts, right? So instead of just being in that reptilian part of your brain all the time and just reacting to shit, understanding your value system and then taking that space like you talked about and Frankl talks about to go, okay, how do I align my reactions or my decisions or my actions with that value system? That's your character. And he even says that knowing your principle doesn't necessarily mean you know how to practice them, right? And we've talked about that on the podcast.
Well, yeah,
just because you define your personal values doesn't mean you're going to fucking live in them. We
have practice integrity on the back of our shirts for a reason.
That's
right?
What I was just going to say.
Yeah, it takes a minute, and you have to try new shit, right? Because not every plan that you have is gonna work, and you might think, man, this is gonna be my value, and it's gonna be awesome, and I'm gonna do this, this, and this to behave so that I'm in accordance with my value, and then you go out there and you try it and it doesn't fucking work.
Yeah.
Okay, back to formula, man. Let's figure it out. Maybe your value was fucked up. Maybe your plan was fucked up. Let's just figure that out. The one like 2 sentences down from that, this is kind of neat. He says, personality is how you respond on a typical day. Character is how you show up on a hard day.
That's right.
And kind of, we've talked about this, like when it gets really gritty and when it gets really tough, that's when your character comes out, because are you going to be that disciplined person that sticks to his values, or are you going to be the person that flies off the handle and starts throwing the bird to everybody?
That's right. And that's what he talks about. Particularly under stress or pressure is when you're going to see if you're actually walking in your values and exhibiting character, or if you're going back to just that baseline personality default response, right? So, because he talks about it's easy to be proactive and determined when things are going well, but the true test is whether you manage to stand by those values when the deck's stacked against you, right?
Yeah.
So back to that Tony Dungy quote: are you going to be worried about what's the outcome, what's going to be the impact of this, or are you just going to stand in your values, do what you're supposed to do, and then not worry, right? Focus on the process, not the outcome, and let the outcome be what the outcome is going to be.
Well, just while we're here for a second, the character that we're talking about, guys, that doesn't necessarily, how do I want to articulate this? It's hard for me to put this into words right now because I didn't really think this through. That checks. But when we're talking about character, right, I'm not necessarily talking about all the good shit, because character can be bad shit too.
Yeah.
Right. You could have some bad character flaws. And if you're referencing that piece of it, I mean, maybe that's an opportunity for you to sit down and do some self-inspection.
Yeah.
Right. And identifying those things that maybe you're not as proud of as you'd want to be, or maybe some things that cause you a little bit of anxiety. When you walk away from an interaction with a person, do you have a little knot in your gut and go, man, I probably could have handled that a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And so that's where we're going to talk about this big old knot all day. Right. And all this shit is tied together, but kind of cart before horse here is maybe you need to do some debrief and look back, some self-inspection stuff, find some of those things that you can improve on, and then try to tie the values that you aspire to those things, and try to move out with a new game plan to maybe eliminate or at least minimize some of those flaws.
Yeah, well, and I think what's important about what you're saying right there is that whether it's self-inspection or defining personal values, it's a continuous process.
Yeah,
it doesn't,
valid.
Right? You don't, well, let me think about myself. Oh, okay, well, there it is. I figured it out. And okay, well, here's my values. And that's what my values, that's not how it works, right? Because, I mean, how many guys have you worked with? I can think of 2 or 3 guys just right now that I'm working with who, as they're going through that self-inspection process and they're actually starting to understand more and more about, they're being really brutally honest with themselves, and they're starting to figure out more and more about kind of who they are and how they've operated in the world and how they've shown up in the past. Those things continue to change, right? And then as they start to make progress, there's a new revelation, right? So I think the key takeaway in that is that developing characters is like a never-ending game, right?
Yeah.
You're going to continue to develop that character. You're going to continue to find ways that you can improve your reaction, your response under stress, right? And you get better at it as you practice it. That's why we talk about practicing integrity, right? Because that's showing up in your character and showing up in your values. But it's kind of a never-ending process. And we've also talked about the fact that, dude, as you grow and you get more exposure to life and you endure more adversity and all of those types of things, you're going to grow as a person. And that may change your values, right? That may change how you approach certain things. And so that's just a continual process that never
life
changes.
Experience, maturity, life events. I mean, shit happens sometimes.
Yeah.
You go through a significant event in your life, like a marriage or a divorce or the birth of a child or, some kind of loss. Like, we turned a corner when both of you ended our Air Force careers, and there was an adjustment period there where we had to, we had to evaluate some things, and how do we move out on that? Well, an interesting discussion could arise when you start to talk about, we were talking about your personality and your character. And then let's try to tie those maybe into reputation a little bit, because those things can be reflective of the other in a lot of ways, right? Your reputation is the way that others perceive you and the way that others talk about you to other people. And we've used the example of, you're going up for a new job or whatever. The boss is going to stick his nugget out the door and say, hey, does anybody know Roscoe? Yeah, Roscoe's a dick. Okay, well, don't hire Roscoe.
Yeah.
So, preceding that, if you're maintaining good character and displaying, trying to be in your value system as much as you can, maybe that leads to a good reputation so that you do get that next thing that you're striving for.
Yeah.
So they can definitely tie off. Or tie
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyways, I thought that was kind of a good difference that he outlines between personality and character.
Yep.
Then he talks about skills, which we talked about a ton of skills on this podcast, right? Whether it's dealing with adversity, resiliency skills, shame resiliency skills, vulnerability.
How about time and emotion
getting
management?
over comfort, goal planning, exactly, all those different things. But I just thought it was hilarious because the first thing that he talks about is get comfortable being uncomfortable. Like if you want to grow, if you want to expand opportunity in your life, you got to get outside of your comfort zone, right? So
here's my first Venn diagram on page 26. And you can see my little caveman drawing in the corner. And I know I've said this on the podcast a lot for people who are watching. Maybe you can see it in the video, but I say draw a circle, write the word comfort in it, and everything you want is outside of that circle.
Yeah.
Right. Well, he does the same goddamn thing. He just drew two circles.
Yeah.
He drew a Venn diagram. So things you're fully prepared to do, and then growth is outside of that. So it's good to see that, even my caveman, cave drawings are kind of the same as the PhD guy. So it as I was reading the book, I was like, oh yeah, we talk about this and we do this and we practice this and we're trying the right things. It seems like we're on the right track here. We're just not using big fancy words like he is.
Yeah. One thing that I liked about something that I liked that he said though, is he said, so summoning the nerve to face discomfort is a character skill. And he couches it as an especially important form of determination. And I guess I'd never really thought about it that way, as a form of determination, but in essence it is, right? Like if you're determined towards a goal, then that's going to be one of the things potentially that helps motivate you to get outside of that comfort zone.
Yeah, I think that can be
set yourself up for some exposure, even if it's negative, like to face the fear of the unknown, all of those things that we've talked about.
That can be a motivator for sure. And in fact, I think, well, I'll use the example right now that we're going through training up for a Spartan race. Like the discomfort of the workouts that I'm doing doesn't even matter.
Yeah,
really. It doesn't even really register. I mean, you kind of know it's going to suck, and you end up in a puddle making a sweat angel at the end of it. But that's not even really part of the calculus, because you know that you have to do these things to get to where you want to go, and you're determined to get on the course and nail it. So that part of it doesn't even really enter the calculus.
Yeah, what I like that he said in this particular instance was he says that research shows that typically it's not about overcoming a cognitive block. So it's not that you're stupid or that you're incapable of understanding something or doing something per se.
No, it's a want to.
It's clearing a motivational hurdle.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. It's a want to. And the example he used was the polyglot example, right? So the example in the book that he used is
the who?
You've got that gal that, always wanted to speak a different language, tried, went to school, struggled miserably, couldn't do it. And so what'd she do? She picked up, went to, I don't remember where it was, but we'll just say for Spain for this example. And she just immersed herself, and got outside of her comfort zone and accepted that the first 3 to 6 months she was going to make a bunch of mistakes and people were going to laugh at her, and she was going to have to ask people to slow down in conversation. And
you just ordered a tuna Corolla.
Yeah.
All right.
But she did it. And like, she speaks 5 different languages fluently now. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's just getting outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah. I know I've said this on the show. I love that he threw a Ted Lasso quote in here. And if you guys haven't watched Ted Lasso, like,
please do.
Fucking genuine comedy, but also very good life lessons out of it. Tim Lasso says, if you're comfortable, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Just plain and simple right there. Well, Roscoe has said this before. I actually wrote this in the book. If your exercise program or diet has the words easy, quick, or instant, it's a bad program. Throw it away and get another one.
Yeah.
Because there's no such thing as easy, quick, or instant when you come to making some of these changes. This takes time. It takes a lot of effort. And think about, you look at yourself in the mirror and you see your midsection. How long did it take it to get there? It's going to take at least that long probably to get rid of that, unless you do something like super drastic.
Yeah.
But given the normal day-to-day stuff that we typically do, it's going to take time, man.
Yeah.
It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of discomfort, and you're going to have to not eat the ho-hos, and you're going to have to say no to some things and yes to some good things, no to some bad things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the other examples that he used that I thought was really good was Steve Martin. So he talked about, Steve Martin, when he first started in comedy, like, was really not very good. Like when he started doing stand-up, he was not good at it at all. And he interviewed Steve, and Steve was telling him, when I first started, like the writing piece of it, like writing jokes and kind of figuring out, going through that process in my mind wasn't comfortable for him. He didn't enjoy that process. It was hard, right? It wasn't easy.
Yeah.
And so, and he says that the problem that a lot of people make sometimes is they think that they have a particular learning style and they want to learn things just in that style because it's easy. But what you have to do is you have to actually get outside of it sometimes, and do the things that are more difficult, because that's going to develop another side of your game or your thought process or whatever the case may be, that's going to be additive to you becoming more of a well-rounded or successful person in whatever avenue you're trying to attack. And so he talked about, being brave enough to embrace discomfort and throw your learning style out the window and do the hard things that seem uncomfortable for you is really important, because in Steve Martin's case, that's what he did. He started writing. I think he got on like SNL or something first as a writer. And, and he said the first couple of years, it was really fucking hard. Right.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, because he had gone through that process and he had learned how to do it and kind of think through the jokes correctly and things like that, like everything kind of came together, and then he just took off. Right. And that's why he's as successful as he is today.
Yeah. You hear this out of a lot of comedians, man. I've been listening to a lot of guys, and it's one thing to listen to their show and laugh and do all that, but it's another thing to listen to them and give interviews and really dig into their style and their process and where they came from and their histories and stuff. And I've probably listened to 10 or 15 of these just in the last few weeks. But they talk about exactly what you said, finding a style and maybe trying to work outside of that a little bit, trying different things, being courageous on stage, try the joke. If the joke doesn't work, whatever. But they also talk about the value of just getting reps, man.
Yeah.
And you're not always, I pulled up this page 36, where he's got the two targets up here. And it says, if you want to hit your target, you have to be willing to miss.
Yeah.
And these guys will go on stage and they'll
sometimes
just completely fucking bomb, dude. But you know what? They don't get all butt hurt. They go back, they take a shot.
Now you go back to formula.
And then they write down what worked, what didn't work. Why did this bomb? Was it the structure of it? Was it the tagline? Was it the punchline? Was it the setup? And they debrief that shit. Yeah. And, they might bomb 5 more times, but then they nail it because they're constantly trying to hone their craft. They're not taking no for an answer.
Right.
And they're accepting failure as an opportunity to get better.
Which is what we talk about all the time, right?
Exactly.
Failure is one of our best teachers. It's just an opportunity to learn and to grow and to learn from our mistakes and then move forward.
Yep.
So don't get butt hurt over it. It's not a big deal. The next thing that came up for me was the section that he talked about on procrastination, because we've talked about that a few times, right? And he said a common problem whenever you're pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone is procrastination, because your brain gets hijacked by the instant gratification monkey who picks what easy and fun over the hard work that needs to be done. All you have to show for your time is a profound sense of inadequacy and idleness. Psychologists have found that procrastination is not a time management problem. This was interesting to me. It's not a time management problem. And that's, we often think it is. And for some people, let's be honest, it may be. They may be really, but 9 times out of 10, it's not a time management problem. It's an emotional management problem, right? Because you're not avoiding effort. You're avoiding the unpleasant feeling that effort, that activity stirs up for you.
It's that word want. I don't want to do it. Well, then that's not an objective thing.
Well, if you don't want to do it, then you don't want whatever it is that you're trying to get to.
It's a difference between want and can't.
Yeah.
There's a big difference there.
Yeah. And guess what? Like we talked about on the podcast, sometimes you got to shovel a lot of shit to get to where you want to be. Sometimes you got to do the things that you don't want to do to get to where you want to be.
Well, just look around the house, man. I mean, daily household chores. Like sometimes that you don't want to fucking do it, right?
Yeah.
You'd rather sit in your sofa and watch a football game than get up and vacuum and do the dishes. And you put it off, and then you put it off the next day because there was a good movie on, and then you put it off the next day because you had to go to work, and before you know it, your dishes are overflowing and your floor's a mess.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily that you don't have the need to do it. You just don't want to do it right now, and really you could even trace that back maybe down to some self-discipline stuff. And there's a lot of programs out there. There's a lot of tips and tricks on how to help you overcome that. And one of the programs that I did a while back was for 30 days, you need to make yourself what he called a power list. 5 things that you're going to do today. And it's it could be a different list every day. Right. And you do that for 30 days. And now you can look back and you've just proven to yourself that you can do all this stuff. Hopefully you've turned a corner that you will do it when you need to do it. But if you practice that over, and we keep using this word practice, right? If you practice that over and over and over again, then it becomes habitual.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what we've talked about too, right?
Yeah.
Take things from really hard to do to habit.
Yep.
Right. Build a plan that lets you get those things to habit. And then once that habit is established, dude, that opens you up to start tackling whatever the next thing is, right? And you just build on those things.
Well, back in the comfort versus uncomfort section that we were just in, one of the things that I wrote down at the bottom of one of the pages was if you do uncomfortable shit enough, it becomes comfortable.
Yeah.
Or you at least learn to accept it. Yeah. Right. Maybe it never gets easy, but you at least get comfortable doing that thing, and then you can try something else.
Well, as you start to do that stuff, you recognize that you are capable of doing it, right? You're capable of operating in those uncomfortable areas.
That doesn't mean it's not going to suck sometimes.
It's like if you go out and you start running and you haven't run for a long time, or you're not a runner, dude, it's going to fucking suck at the beginning, right?
Brittany runs a marathon.
But yeah, right?
Great movie.
Over time, right? You start to make gains and you start to see wins and all that builds. And then you start to get a little momentum. And next thing you know, you're running a half marathon or a marathon. So,
she started out and she couldn't run a couple hundred yards. But after 6 months, she was running miles at a time.
Yeah.
And she could have looked back and, that first time that she ran to the end of the street and back, or to the stop sign and back, and she was doubled over winded, she would look back on that and you know what, that's not uncomfortable anymore.
Yeah.
So if you do uncomfortable shit enough, then it becomes comfortable.
Yeah.
And you can press through.
But I really like that on the procrastination. I hadn't thought about it that way before, but it's not a time management problem. It's an emotional management problem. So, and we talk a lot about, right, being able, that's what's part of emotional intelligence that we did 2 episodes on is, dude, managing your emotions, right? That's part of this process. So, all right. Anything else on that one, brother?
Now you're moving on to becoming a sponge.
I put accelerate growth down, which was just before becoming a sponge. But here's all I want to say about this, right? It's because even if you go back to procrastination, skills of character, and accelerate growth, like the first 25 pages, like page 25 to 50 can basically be summed up with what we like to say, which is get in the fucking arena, right?
Yep. Do the shit.
Like get outside your comfort zone, get in the arena, get bloody, get dirty. Fucking try, right? You may come up short, you may fail, but at least you fucking tried, man. At least you can say, "Hey, man, I tried to do that," right? And don't listen to the folks in the stands, that are screaming obscenities and throwing tomatoes at you because they're not in the fucking arena with you.
Yeah.
Who cares what they think, right? So if you want to accelerate growth, if you want to do these things, just get in the arena. Be brave enough to use your knowledge to acquire skills, right? Even in the fighter squadron, it wasn't about mastery. I mean, it was about mastery at a certain point, but at the very beginning, when you're a brand new punk in a fighter squadron, you can't do much at all but stay visual in tactical sorties, especially but that's it. It's exposure, man. The more we got exposed, the more tactical scenarios we got exposed to, the more habit patterns we built around piccolo drills and, hands-on throttle and stick for different phases or scenarios, whether it was air to air or air to ground. You start to build more and more proficiency. And the next thing you know, dude, you're a raging wingman and ready for the flood. And then you start the flight lead upgrade and you suck because you're not used to making decisions in the front, but you get exposure and you get the lather, rinse, repeat, the repetitive over and over and over again, and fuck this stuff, I fucked that up, so what's the lesson learned, and apply it to the next one, and then next thing you know, you're ready to be an instructor, and you suck at that because you don't know how to teach.
Well,
So.
one thing that's key, there's a couple of things that are key in there is one, I think you need to surround yourself with a good support structure. Guys that are going to help hold you accountable, guys that are going to help motivate you, because it is a slippery slope, man. Especially if you're trying this stuff for maybe the first time, it's easy to get discouraged. It's easy to maybe complete a goal and then not set another one. You're like, oh, well, I got this. And before you know it, you've gone through, a period of time where you've kind of let yourself go and you need to kickstart again. You might almost be back at square one because you didn't keep practicing that. It's not a one and done type thing. This is an iterative process, and it goes in a circle, and it keeps going and going and going. And the other piece is, I think you got to have a good attitude about it. And
you do.
I told this story the other day on the show.
Effort. We've talked about that a ton.
I had a kid came in on a Thursday and just completely bombed. He's going through the IPUG. He's an A10 crossing over to F35, and he just completely bombed, man. It was pretty bad. But he maintained a really good attitude through the debrief and through the whole sortie, and his instructor gave him a lot of really good points. He came in on Monday, and he bombed again. But again, he sat down at the end of it, and he had a really good attitude, took a lot of notes, and I expect the kid, I even told him, we were walking to the bathroom between the execution and the debrief, and I was like, dude, just keep your chin up, man. It doesn't matter how many X's on your grade sheet, right? You're going to get through this. The important thing is you maintain a good attitude. You want to actually learn this. It's imperative that you get this stuff, because the next time you do this right on your own, you're going to have a student on your wing.
Yeah.
And you don't want to go out there and be a blubbering idiot with a student out there, because then that's going to tarnish your reputation. See this big old knot?
Yep.
All right. So anyways, have a good attitude and keep going.
Yeah. And just remember, it's about exposure. He even uses pilots in the example there, because he talks about how pilots learn to cope with discomfort by intensifying it.
Yeah.
Right?
EPs in the weather.
Yeah, EPs, all the stuff all the training that we go through, and it's like, sometimes things at home, something will come up and Alicia will be like, why aren't you more spun up around this? And it's like, well, I've had people shooting at me while guys are yelling at me on the ground to help them while I'm trying to figure out where the fuck number 2 just went, and trying to get my targeting bot on whatever I'm supposed to kill.
We don't have any.
And the tanker's nowhere to be found. And it's like, this is not that.
Yeah.
What's there to get spun up around?
Yeah.
So anyways, yeah.
So
now we're...
But what did you just describe? You just described, if you do uncomfortable shit enough, it becomes comfortable, right?
Yeah,
so we drilled EPs at night in the weather so many times that when you have an EP in your 737 on a bright sunny day, 20 miles from the field, you're like,
whatever.
Give me a refill my coffee, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's exactly it, right? And I think the other thing to point out about that is, as you start to do this, like maybe things that used to spin you up won't spin you up as much anymore, or become less and less, because you're just like
some of that emotion.
You do. You're learning how to regulate yourself emotionally.
You're separating a little bit of that brainstem into the cognitive shit, and you're thinking about things logically, and you're not letting that reptilian brain come out and dictate your actions anymore.
Yeah. All right. Now I'm going to be a sponge. You go.
Really cool chapter. I think that I'm guilty of some of this stuff, but open your aperture and try to stay curious about things. And that's something that I'm working on really hard as we go through a lot of these interviews on this podcast. That's something that I'm trying to learn. It's a skill and I don't know, a habit, I guess, that I'm trying to learn, is ask more questions and try to be genuinely curious about what other people or other things are going through. And I've gone through some iterations of going down deep rabbit holes on the internet and YouTube and trying to, just learn things and trying to soak in what I would call knowledge. Other people might not, but some of it's useless, some of it's helpful. But that was the big takeaway for me, is trying to stay curious.
Yeah, and we've talked about it on the podcast, right? It's a bit of a platitude. Be curious, not judgmental.
Yeah.
Right. But I also think, like, the older you get, I think the more difficult it becomes. You kind of get set in your ways.
Kind of have this, I got that.
Well, you have a lens that you view the world through.
Yeah.
And
you have experience.
And you have experience that supports that, right? And then you have algorithms on every app that you use that supports the narratives that you want to believe, or the things that you think about.
Shit.
I know, it's so good.
Woo. That last.
It's so good.
Is that Dragon's Breath or whatever?
Yeah, it's Komodo Dragon.
Komodo Dragon.
Yeah.
Good God, man.
You're welcome. But yeah, that's it, right? So Be a sponge. And what he's basically saying there is just that improving depends not on the quantity of information you seek out, but the quality of the information that you take in, and that growth is less about how hard you work than how well you learn. So, dude, just recognize, and we've talked about this before on the podcast too, that you may not have all the answers and you may not understand everything. And that the lens that you view the world through may be very different than another person views. And so take the time to try to understand their point of view, right? We talked about that in validation. I don't necessarily have to agree with somebody, but I may be able to go, it makes sense to me how you got to that conclusion based on what you just described to me. I may not agree with that conclusion, but it makes sense to me how you got there. You know what I mean?
You and I just, when we had lunch the other day, we disagreed on some things, but
we disagreed on
some things politically. Maybe I haven't thought about it like that. But I don't have to agree with it. But I will say that after that conversation, I went back and did some reading and tried to figure out where you were coming from on some of the points that you had. Couldn't find them, but
I'll find them for you
because I had my ad blockers up or whatever. But no, I think it's important to do what you said. I think it's important to try to put yourself in their shoes for just a second, or at least listen to them when they give you their, well, this is how I got to this.
Yeah.
This point in my life, or this idea that I have, or whatever it may be. I think that's an important piece of it. And, previous Roscoe may have just been like, well, you're stupid, and moved on. Whereas new Roscoe is trying to go, okay, I can see your side of it.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it right now, but let me get back to you.
Yeah.
I may not agree then, but at least now I can go back and do the homework and get the knowledge. One of the things that he was talking about in here was get the knowledge for your own personal growth.
That's right.
And developing your skills and your knowledge base, not to feed your ego.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not going and doing the research. So, well, I'm going to fucking prove CAS wrong.
CAS
this. I'm going to find the 3 articles that go against what he just said. I'm going to go back and I'm going to try to research and go, okay, well, he said this. Let me go see if I can find that source data, read that, and maybe pick out the 1 or 2 paragraphs that are actually true, and then, form my own thoughts around
if
that.
it changes your opinion or not.
That's a huge piece of it right there. Is you have to be, you can't be married to your ideas.
No.
We talk about this in the Air Force. Like, you can't be married to your game plan, bro.
No.
You have to be willing to adapt and change, because people are going to throw new information at you. You're going to see new tactics. You're going to see a different picture, whatever it may be. The same is true in your own life.
Yeah.
You cannot be married to your ideals and your opinions, right? You have to be open to new things. If you follow politics at all right now, there is a giant divide between what we've got going on the blue team and the red team.
Yep.
And if you're married to either one of those, then you're not seeing the big picture.
That's
and
correct.
Sometimes you have to step back and sift through a lot of shit to get down to it. And there's good and there's bad on both sides, right?
Yeah.
And I would encourage people to align with the side that more closely represents their values.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing to point out about that too is we don't have to agree.
No.
And if we don't agree, it doesn't affect my opinion of you, because you're not my friend because of your opinions on politics. You're my friend because
you're not going to come stick signs in my yard. And
you're my friend because I value you as a person, and because I know your character, and I appreciate the work you've done, and how you strive to be better, and how you take care of your family, and how you show up for people in your life. Like, those are the things that matter. Right? We're not going to agree on everything. We're different people.
Well, you're a Seahawks fan, so fuck you.
Exactly. I'm right all the time. I'm sorry. I can't help that. But, so that's the point.
Yeah. I'm looking at a sign right now. It says, I'm a pilot. So when it's possible that I could be wrong, it's highly unlikely.
It's very unlikely. Yeah. Yes. Okay.
No, I thought that was a good chapter. He talked a lot about, developing your credibility, developing your approachable demeanor through the knowledge that you have. And again, it goes back to not to feed your ego, but to legitimately try to understand as many sides of the topic as you can.
Yeah. No, that's important, right? Yeah. Okay. What was next for you?
Well, I'm just in the summary now because, again, my sticky notes quit.
Okay.
I ended up with a sticky note on every page. So I went to the summary. And so the next one was becoming an imperfectionist.
Yeah. Fighting perfectionism was the next thing that I have. I'll just add one thing that he talked about that was kind of in that be a sponge piece that I made a quick little note on that just falls into and kind of reinforces what we were just talking about. And he talks about this thing called absorptive capacity, which basically means, how do you acquire information, right? It's what you were saying. Do you proactively seek knowledge, skills, and perspectives, or do you react to them? Are you the kind of person that could sit down and have a conversation with a Democrat if you're a Republican and listen to what they have to say and go, well, maybe I can learn something here as to why they think that or why they feel that way? Or are you a person that just immediately goes and spins into the ceiling, and starts regurgitating all the Republican platform stump lines? You know what I mean? So, and again, it comes back to what we've talked about before. Are you going to react to things, or are you going to pause it for a second, listen? Like, just learn to listen. Do you focus on feeding your ego or fueling your growth? Like you were talking about, right? And don't seek knowledge to grow your ego. Like you were saying, I'm not going to sit there and go read a bunch of articles so I can prove CAS wrong. It's more, what do I need to take away from this?
No, and I don't want to make this a political discussion, but it so clearly illustrates what we're talking about, that it's just easy right now. And the only tag that I would have on that moving forward is, guys, stop getting your fucking news from social media.
Yeah,
right.
Please
stop getting your news from Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Maybe even YouTube. If you're getting it from YouTube, at least vet the fucking source.
Yeah.
Right. And I would even stay away from the mainstream media. Find you a couple of outlets out there, and they do exist.
Yeah, sure.
Google is probably not your friend. There's another search engine called Brave that's a little less biased and doesn't hide as many of the articles. So use a search engine that's not going to filter things for you, and go find the information from the source, right? And maybe even read 2 or 3 different articles about the same topic, regardless of what it is, because then you might get closer to the truth. Read one from one side, read one from the other side, and then try to find one in the middle. And that's where you're going to really develop this kind of holistic approach, or this big picture approach to what the topic is. If you're just tuning into the mudslinging, you're never going to see it.
Yeah, dude, I'll tell you, one of the best thought exercises that I was ever exposed to in my master's program was in a comparative politics class that I took, where the teacher purposely made us take a topic and debate it, but we were not allowed to take the side that we wanted. We had to debate the other side.
Oh, that's good.
And when you do that, and you have to go back and do research and go through what's the arguments, lay it out in front of yourself and go, you'll come away, and it may not change your mind completely, but you'll come away and you'll go, I can see how
somebody would get there.
How somebody could get there with this information, right? So I just realized too that mainstream media is not reporting.
No, it's propaganda.
Facts. It's all editorial these days. Yep. So
it's all propaganda for one side or the other.
Perfectionism, fighting perfectionism.
Yep.
Go.
I wrote in the margin here: aim for perfection, but accept excellence. We've talked about that a lot
all the time.
Where, if you try to make 100 on every test, but you make a 96, that's pretty fucking good.
Yeah.
Right. And then down in the meat of the conversation, he was talking about kind of that daily grade sheet, or that daily check. And I always say this: when I go turn out the lights in my room after reading and kind of winding down for the night, I'm going in to kiss the wife goodnight and get ready to go to bed. I turn off the lights and go, did I move the ball today? Yes or no? Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes you just got a lot of shit going on, or sometimes you take a lazy day.
Yeah.
All right. I would encourage you not to take 30 lazy days in a row.
Yeah.
But every now and then you just want a pajama day where you watch Netflix.
Yeah.
Ask yourself that. Really try to sit there, and when you close your eyes at night, debrief the day to yourself and go, did I do what it was that I said I was going to do today? Did I move the ball? And when I'm talking about moving the ball, I'm talking about those things in your life that are promoting the growth, that are getting you closer to the thing that you're striving to. If you're trying to write a book, did you write today? Did you write a single word? Did you proofread?
Or research?
Did you read an article that moved that ball a little bit, or take a note, or whatever? If you're trying to learn a new song on your guitar, did you pick up your fucking guitar today? There's measurable things that you can do to tell you whether or not you move the ball. And I think that's a good habit pattern for people to get in.
Yeah. Yeah. And he talks about, I'm going to just share a few notes that I made here, because it talks about the meta-analysis that he did around perfectionism. And he says that the average correlation between perfectionism and performance at work was 0.
Yeah.
When it came to mastering tasks, perfectionists were no better than their peers. Sometimes they even did worse. The skill and inclinations,
had a lot higher anxiety too.
Yeah, right, because they're so fucking stressed out. The skill and inclinations that drive people to the top of their high school or college class may not serve them after they graduate, right? So your ability to shove yourself in a corner and put your nose in a book and study may serve you really well in school, when all you're doing is writing a paper or taking a test. But you are building no social skills. That whole piece of emotional intelligence and social awareness, right? You're building none of those other things, those soft skills that are applicable to the real world.
Bro, what's the classic example of that, though? It's a doctor.
Yeah.
Right? A doctor with no bedside manner. Exactly. The guy's a walking encyclopedia of Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah.
He can diagnose your issue and walk out the room and fix you in 5 seconds. But he's an asshole to talk to, right? Or he's fucking more dry than that coffee mug, right? And they can't teach that. It's something you have to develop over time.
That's
so
right.
Get out there and try new things, man.
And then he said, in their quest for flawless results, research suggests that perfectionists get 3 things wrong. The first thing is they obsess about details that don't matter because they're so worried about getting everything right so they waste time, basically. They avoid unfamiliar situations and difficult tasks that might lead to failure. They're so worried about failing, right? This goes back to when's good enough. It's never good enough if you're a perfectionist, right? And they berate for making mistakes, which makes it harder to learn from them. And it's harder for them to learn from others. Extensive evidence shows that it's having high personal standards, which is what you were just talking about.
Yep.
And I would argue also having done and understand your own personal values, not pursuing perfection that fuels growth. Many people interpret that as advice to shift from be the best to do your best. What do we always say? Just be a good dude, man. Do the best you can. That's all you can do, right? And like I think Brene Brown says, I don't want to be good. I don't want to do things so that the world views me as being good. I just want to do good.
Yeah.
Right. So,
do you ever see the movie Crimson Tide? Denzel Washington,
long time ago.
Some old dude, submarine.
Been a long time ago.
Yeah,
that's an old movie, man.
So there was like the
80s, isn't it?
They ran a drill, 80s or 90s. They ran a drill, and Denzel Washington's the XO. He goes up to the captain. I forget the guy that played him. I can see his face, but I can't think of his name. Anyways, he goes up to him and he gives him the result of the exercise. And the captain goes, "Is this the best they could do?" And he says, "No, sir, but that's what they did." Okay, well, you at least have a starting point now, right? You have a baseline to go off of.
Yeah.
So one of the things with the perfectionist thing is, if you're constantly chasing that, then you need a way to measure, right? Are you getting closer?
Goes back to goals, has to be measurable.
You brought up the details that don't matter, chasing those details that don't matter. How many times did we do this in mission planning where we're like, fuck it, dude, we got an 80% solution. We're going to spend the next couple of hours on contingencies and we're going to move out.
Yeah.
Right. Get a workable plan. Like Patton says, a violently plan executed today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right. So let's get something down. Let's get an 80% solution. And then let's focus the rest of the time on what can go wrong with this plan, fix that shit. And then we're moving out, man.
Yeah.
And I think you can apply that to a lot of the things that dude, there's obviously times where perfection needs to be close to perfect.
Sure.
Right. Building a house. Structurally, that thing needs to be sound. Like you can't just nail a couple 2x4s together. And
open heart
away.
Surgery, probably not 80%.
Yeah. If you're a neurosurgeon, don't take an 80-20.
Yeah.
Don't use the Pareto principle on my Neuralink install. But most of the stuff that we do day to day, 80% is going to get you pretty darn. Doc John even talked about it.
Yeah, he did.
He talked about 80%. If you get to where you're operating smooth and efficient at 80%, the other 20 usually takes care of itself.
Well, if you're chasing that last 20, you may never actually move out because you're just going to find it's like when we had Richard on, right? And you know this from books that you've written. You can sit there and you can fidget with that thing for years if you want to, changing words here or there, changing the structure, adding a character, to subtract, whatever the case may be, right?
That's right.
If you do that, if you could just continue to tinker, you're never going to get it off the shelf.
Well, we had a whole episode where we talked about when is good enough. And a lot of times that's not measurable. And one of the things that he talked about in that chapter is you have to figure out some way to measure this shit, right? Subjectively measuring something is way more difficult than objectively measuring it. Black and white, yes, no, plus, minus, those are pretty easy, right? And like most of the time, I tell my kids, I've been telling my kids this for years, like just do the math. If you just do the math, usually the numbers will tell you the answer.
Yeah.
I ran a project with Nikki the other day where we sat down and did a line by line 60-day look back budget. And I mean, his jaw was on the floor when we were done with it. I said, see, look, dude, like I can highlight right here in the numbers, in the math, where you've got some room for improvement. Like I circled a few door dashes right there. I said, that was probably a weekend, wasn't it? Yeah. Well, see, you could eat ham and cheese sandwiches instead of spending all that money.
Yeah.
And these are really easy exercises to kind of get you there. The subjective measurement, I think, is much more difficult.
It is.
Like writing a book, right? Because it is art, and art is subjective.
Yep.
And a lot of that just comes down to how do you feel about it? Like,
Yeah.
like, would you be proud of this when you put it out there, or
Yeah.
or are you a little bit ashamed?
But I'd imagine too that people that maybe work in those more subjective areas, they've defined a process for themselves, and that process
for
is
sure.
also almost always is probably also a benchmark for how close am I, right? That process it gives benchmarks to. So sometimes you have to build that for yourself.
Well, you can rely on other people too.
Yep, you can.
You can develop a support structure around you, like writing a book. I can pass that out to other people and go, "Hey, man, what do you think? Give me some feedback on this." And if the feedback is 80-20 good, then I'm on the right track. If it's if they got more negative comments, identifying plot holes, whatever it may be, okay, I got some work to do. And I think those can help you measure that too on the more subjective side.
Yeah, agreed. Anything else on that one, brother?
No, dude. The next section, talking about scaffolding and support structures for your obstacles and all that kind of stuff.
I just had one more thing that I picked up at the first section, which was the external versus internal motivation, which we've talked about a ton on the podcast. So,
intrinsic motivations.
Yeah. And ultimately just realize that excellence is more than meeting other people's expectations. It's about living up to whatever standard you've actually set for yourself. That's what you want to focus on.
Well, but I like that word though that you use is excellence and not perfection.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's not perfection.
Again, the back of the shirt says practice. It's you're going to get some of this shit wrong sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Structures for motivation.
Yeah.
That's the second portion of the book. What do you have on that?
Again, I'm in the summary here, so I don't have to go page by page, but he talked about turning your daily grind into your daily joy was kind of the first part of the first chapter in this
growth
section.
Mentality, mindset.
Yeah, but what we were talking about, remember we were talking with Kid the other day, and by the time this episode comes out, that one will have dropped. And he was talking about, he got off on this long tangent about, man, you have to really enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. And if that whole, like I heard when I was, 11 or 12 years old, I'm driving a tractor for my dad. And I knew when Paul Harvey came on at noon, it was time to head towards the road because Dad would be there in a few minutes to pick us up and go get lunch. Right. So I'm listening to Paul Harvey, and there was a blurb in this thing, and I remember it's clear as day. And he says, if you find a job you like, you'll never work a day in your life. And that's turning your passion into profit, man.
Yeah.
And if it's your passion, then it's never going to seem like work to you. And that's kind of what I took away from that chapter, from that little bit that Grant has in this book is, dudes, if you're doing things that you're passionate about, that you enjoy, that you want to do, it's not going to feel like a grind to you. Like replacing the sprinkler heads in my backyard because my dumbass dog chewed them all off again. I'm not passionate about that.
Yeah.
That fucking sucks.
Yeah.
But guess what I get to do?
Summer in Phoenix.
Guess what I get to do tomorrow morning? All right. But going to work every day and teaching guys how to break shit and kill people, I like that.
Yeah.
I enjoy that. And it doesn't feel like work to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that I thought was neat about this section, so just for the listeners, he talks a lot about building scaffolding and talks about how, you're going to put up these temporary structures around you sometimes to help keep you motivated.
Explain that a little bit.
He just says that scaffolding a lot of times can come from other people. It's a way that we get a foothold or a boost towards achieving something, or working on something. It's typically tailored to the obstacle that's in your path, right? And we talk a lot about obstacles. You can go around, you can go under, you can go through, you can go over, but obstacles are just opportunity. It's just a way for you to learn.
This sounds an awful lot like goal setting and your circle
forward.
of 5.
Comes at a pivotal point in time, and it's typically temporary, right? So because it's an external motivational factor, right? And like we talk about, you can use that external at some point, but at some point it has to be intrinsic if you're going to carry that motivation forward. But he also talks about the fact that it's okay to take breaks, that time away from practice helps sustain passion and it unlocks fresh ideas. So, we talk a lot about, get after it, put the effort in, go. But sometimes, dude, it's okay to put it on pause for a second or two, right?
I think you have to.
If you're getting overwhelmed with something, sometimes just taking a tactical pause and going, you know what, I'm going to take tomorrow off from my training regimen because I'm sore all over and my body needs a break. You'll feel a lot better the next day, right? Or if you're working on a project, like
writing a book.
Yeah, like writing a book. Yeah. Or, even if you're a younger man who's in college right now and you've got a lot of papers that you're writing, right? It's okay to take a pause, right? Because work on it a section at a time, get whatever that main point idea is out with some supplemental information that supports it, and then put it aside for a little bit, or put it aside for a day or two, and then come back, and it'll be much better by the time you're done with it.
Well, there's some good takeaways right there. If these things are self-induced, right? And the example that I use is writing a book, right? Because I got a big project that I'm working on right now, and I shelved it for the entire summer. I put it down about the first week of June, and I just picked it up last week, right? I needed to step away from it for a little while, forget about it for a little bit. Don't even, I mean, it was closed on my computer. It wasn't open. I hid the books that I was using for research. I stepped completely away from it. And then I went back one night. I was just like, okay, I think I'm ready to re-engage. I watched one video on YouTube, and I'm like, bam, I'm back in, dude. And I had this new motivation.
Yeah.
And before you know it, I'm starting to wrap some things up.
Yeah, it's energy on task too, right?
Yeah. This is something that's self-induced that doesn't necessarily have a deadline to it. All right. Now let's take that college kid who's got all those papers due or coming up. There's a deadline associated with that. So taking the time, taking the break, and stepping away from that, you have to step away.
Got to time manage it.
Exactly, right? And you can't create more time, but you can start earlier. All right. Jocko Willink is famous for posting on his fucking Instagram a picture of his watch every morning at about 4:30 in the morning. That's how he creates time in his day to be able to do all this stuff. He gets up at 4:30, takes a picture of his watch, does his fucking workouts. He's done more than most people do before noon. He's done it before 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
Right. And then he starts his day and gets shit done. So if you want to be able to take that space to be able to walk away from those papers for a little bit, you got to get started early. Like your example in Monterey. All right. If you start day one of the semester, now you can take a week where you just kind of go F off and read some science fiction for a little bit, clear your mind, right? And then you can re-engage. But if you wait until a week before they're due, you're probably not.
No,
you're
you'll
not afforded that opportunity.
Man. Yeah, because you're just playing catch up at that point. So there is some time management associated with that, obviously. But one of the other things that he talked about too is just that, when you're trying to hone skills, you're going to get stuck. You may stagnate. But he was saying that oftentimes when you get in a rut, people think that you just got to a lot of people will give up at that point because they think they can't do it, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a signal that you can't do it. It's just a signal that you may need to, guess what, pivot, like we talk about, right? And so we've talked about this. Progress rarely happens in a straight line, right?
Yeah.
It's usually a bunch of left and right hand turns. Like sometimes it's a backwards hike to get back to the trailhead, to find the path you were supposed to be on that takes you up the right side of the mountain, right? So, dude, you're going to take one step forward and two steps back sometimes. You're going to get things that get thrown in your way, obstacles that are presented to you that are going to take you off whatever, pure perfect course that you may have on in your mind towards achieving whatever you're going towards. Don't get frustrated by it. Just pivot, adapt, be flexible, recage, reassess, reevaluate, set new goals, set new timelines, and go. That's all you got to do. That's all you can do.
No, I like that, man. And avoiding as much, this is going to sound like I'm talking out both sides of my mouth, but hear me out. Avoiding as much structure as you can to a point. And by saying that, what I'm really trying to say, I guess, in a longer form is, like, when Katie and I were doing 75 Hard, one of the prescribed things that you have to do is you have to do 2 workouts a day, and one of them has to be outside. If you're married to the structure that you have and then something changes that you don't have any control over, well, now you're kind of effed in the A, right? And the example that I used is I'm going to get up every morning at 6 o'clock and do my outside workout when it's nice and cool outside. Well, what happens when I get put on the early shift at work and I have to be at work at 6? Crap, now I'm screwed, right? So allowing yourself a little bit of flexibility in that. You know what? I'll go to the gym in between sims. And then when I get home and the sun goes down this evening, I'll go for my walk or my run or whatever it is. So a little bit of flexibility and not being so married to your game plan. It sounds like I'm repeating myself, which I am. And I think that'll help you. I think that it helps keep you a little bit motivated. It helps keep you engaged a little bit. You have to think through these things daily or weekly or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, I really love what he said here, which I'm going to just read it because it's important for people who may be struggling with this to hear. And that's: finding the right method involves trial and error, right? It involves trial and error. You guys, you may not get it right the first time.
That's huge, man.
And I'm going to read this one twice because I want this one to sink in. Some trials will just be plain errors.
Yeah.
Right. Some things that you attempt are just going to fucking fail. they're not going to work.
But you learn from that.
But even if you discover a better method, your inexperience with it will usually make it worse at first, right? If you're inexperienced at something, you're going to screw up at times. But those things but that's normal, right?
Yeah.
Like I think it's important to normalize that. Like you're going to screw up, you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. And sometimes it's often necessary because you won't learn the lesson that you need to and figure out how to move forward and make that change or adapt if that doesn't happen.
Well, I mean, let's take your diet, for example. How many people subscribe to these online fad diets and then they fail at it, right? Wouldn't it be more beneficial to you in the long run to find something that works for you?
Yeah.
And you have to do that through a trial and error
process.
It's
total trial and error because you got to find out what works for
you.
You
got to find out what works for your body. You got to find out what works for your battle rhythm daily. Yep. You got to find out what you can actually sustain.
What the right macro balance, the right caloric intake.
When people ask me, says, dude, I'm thinking about starting a diet. What should I do? I was like, well, the first question you should ask is, can I sustain this for the rest of my life? If the answer is no, then you can't eat peanuts and bacon for the rest of your life. Like you're gonna give up on that eventually. So you have to allow yourself some room in there to do the things that you are capable of sustaining. My example is I try to eat 5 salads a week. All right. I can sustain that for the rest of my life if I choose to. It's not really that complicated. I try to eliminate sugar as much as I can. I don't drink a lot of sodas, and I'm able to measure these things. Right. But if you're going on, well, dude, I'm doing Atkins for the rest of my life. #fail.
Yeah.
I'm going to do keto or carnivore or whatever the new fad is nowadays. Pick something that you can sustain, right? And you have to try some new things. Does your body respond to eating only fruit in the mornings? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah.
Does your body respond to not having breakfast at all? I found out that I'm capable of doing a 16-hour fast pretty easy. It like my normal battle rhythm, and my body respond to that. I do fasted cardio almost every day.
Yeah, so do I.
Some people can't. Some people need fuel in their system. Some people, a big bowl of oatmeal or a piece of toast or whatever.
It's funny because like Alicia and I, when we work out together, I typically don't eat in the morning until after I've worked out.
Yeah.
She has to give her body something in order to sustain her workout. It's just our bodies are different. So
the point is like,
but that's trial and error. That's what we've discovered.
Exactly. Don't just take the cookie cutter answer off the internet, off of, there's this guy with 8-pack abs on Facebook that said
it's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
And then I pulled this off just because we've talked about this so many times and it was just validating. And he says that of all the factors that have been studied, the strongest known force in daily motivation is a sense of progress. Small goals, small wins,
small victories.
Yep.
Love it.
And so that's what, and you guys, if you've listened to us at all, when we've talked goal planning, we have hit this so many times, right? You got to make small goals that are achievable. You got to get some small wins behind you if you want to sustain that motivation over time.
That's right.
Get the small victories.
This I think was a good section when you read the whole thing and then you go back and you just kind of step back and you look at the whole thing.
Yeah, 30,000 foot view.
Yeah, it wrapped up a lot of things because he talked about not competing with anyone except yourself, and finding a side project that you can successfully complete, and that helps you build that momentum. It gives you a sense of progress. It gives you that it gives you that warm and fuzzy feeling that, man, I can do this. This over here, this is really hard, but this gives me the momentum. This gives me that good feeling at the end of the day, whether it's, I'm going to commit to reading 10 pages of a book for, a month or two or whatever it is, something that can fuel that drive.
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things in here, and it was kind of back in the beginning. I wanted to just throw this out there, man.
Sure.
This is something that I really suck at is, relaxing is not a waste of time. It's an investment in your well-being. And I really need to practice this a little bit more. I've been trying to take more rest days through this training cycle, and I can feel the benefits of it. It's a psychological thing for me. I feel worthless if I don't do something. If I take a lazy day, or if I take a day where I don't go to the gym, or don't do what it is I was supposed to do that day, I kind of had this feeling of when I turn that light off and go, did I move the ball? Well, no, and that makes me feel bad about myself. And then my self-esteem goes down a little bit. And I'm like, fuck, I'm a fucking slug and I'm not going to be able to fit in my shorts tomorrow. And so I need to do a better job of taking that recovery. and letting the body heal, letting the mind heal, letting, that mind, body, soul balance kind of even itself out a little bit, because you can't operate at 110, 100% of the time.
Yeah.
You got to take some recharge time. I need to do a better job of that.
Yeah, dude, I've been there too. Like I struggled with that through most of my life. I've gotten much better at it in the last 3 to 5 years. Some of that's because my job's not that difficult and I have more free time.
Yeah, same.
But even then, I for so long in my life, I was in the habit of just go. Like I couldn't, go 12 hours at work, come home, get as much as I can, get done around the house, done, sleep, lather, rinse, repeat, just nonstop. Right. And it's exhausting. And part of that is self-inspection, right? So part of that is figuring out what is that balance that you need for you, because you do have to give yourself recharge time, whether that's your body or your brain or just your emotional state at times, right? And figuring out those little tips and tricks, it doesn't have to be a whole day, but maybe it's how you start your morning, right? Maybe it's like I've found that if I can get up before everybody else and I have just like 30 minutes to just kind of focus on the day, just have some quiet space to kind of clear my head and get really specific around what I want today to be, that sets me off on a really good foot for the
until
day.
your dog eats your fucking book. Yeah. Dude, I was so looking forward to this morning, man. Kids left to go to college yesterday. House is quiet. Empty nesting. It's a Saturday morning. I got the house to myself. I get up, I fix my coffee, I sit in my chair. Fans going. We got AC for a change. This is great. Yeah. Sit down in my chair. I read. I go to the other room for a few minutes and I come back and my my book is in the floor. The book, I'm like 25 pages into this book. I just started it this morning and it's in pieces.
Yeah.
That dog is so lucky he's cute because he almost met God this morning.
That's hilarious. So pivot, man. You need to get a scribe, Kindle, get an ebook.
Yeah.
Something.
What did I do? I went to my happy place. I put my weighted vest on and went for a run across.
There you go. See, there's ways to cope and deal with it. That's all good.
Yeah.
Anyways, I agree with you, man. I think that's a hard thing for a lot of guys to do, but it's important. But don't let it swing too far the other way either, right? Like,
there's things in there.
There's balance to it.
Exactly. And there's, if you're spinning so many plates that you're having a hard time balancing, man, put a couple of them down.
Yeah.
Because probably in the grand scheme, and dude, this doesn't mean that like life isn't going to kick you in the nuts sometimes. And, I've been going through some shit the last couple of weeks where it seems like it just keeps coming, man. It's like fucking Tyson in the ring and won't quit swinging, and what do, man? You absorb as much of it as you can. You come up with a game plan, you nug through it.
No, that's a great point though. Cause like that was something that I struggled with a lot in my 20s and my 30s is I'm a huge overfunctioner. And so I would overextend myself, and I would be doing so much for so many different people that I didn't have any time to do anything else. Right. And it would take a toll on me at times.
It wears you down, man.
It does. It totally wears you down. And I've gotten much better at being able to say no sometimes.
Yeah.
And dude, I still feel bad when I do it most of the time.
But let me ask you
still
this.
feel regret.
Let me ask you this though. How do you rack and stack these things? Right? Do you have like a priority list? Like obviously if mama's not happy, you're not happy.
Yeah.
If the house is broke, AC's out or whatever it is, those are going to take priorities. But some of these ancillary things in our life, it's kind of hard to
and again, sometimes it's qualitative, it's not quantitative, right? It's not just I can sit down with, the calculator and figure out who's in front of who and how much space do I have in my day. Sometimes it's just, dude, how much emotional space do I have to give?
Yeah.
Because maybe I just don't have it in me today. Maybe I just got back from a trip where I, was with a captain who fucking wanted to talk nonstop. And I'm so exhausted because, I have about, 2,000 words to share a day and he was forcing me into 4. And, I just, it's just, you have to figure out what works for you. Right. It may be what's the sensitivity of what's being asked? Is it something that needs to be handled right away?
Yeah.
Is somebody having an emotional reaction to something that they've created for themselves?
Mm-hmm.
And it'd probably be better for me to let them figure it the fuck out. And it doesn't need to be an emergency for me.
Oh yeah. See, that's valid.
Right. Like there's kind of a mental checklist that you go through. And of course it depends on the person too. You know, if it's you and you need me right now, I'm not going to ask a question. I'm on my way. Right. That's just, that's how I operate.
Well,
that's only true for, I can probably count on one hand how many people that's true for. Right. So
I think a lot of what you're describing though is just simple triage, right? And assigning a value to the different things, the different plates that you're spinning, you know, and then you get this pop-up threat that comes up. Oh, this happened to me the other day. The sprinklers went out in the other house. Okay, where does this rank on the list of shit that I need? Is it emergent to me right now?
Is it a priority?
And something that Katie's heard me say this 1,000 times about a bunch of different people, like lack of preparation on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part.
It does not.
Right? Because you failed to do what you were supposed to do. That does not mean that I have to jump in right now and solve your problem. So I'm going to afford you the opportunity to sweat this out a little bit, maybe learn a little bit of a lesson from it, and then I'll help you out.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes, you know, especially with my kids, I'm gonna have to be like, well, it sounds like you got something you need to get done.
That's right.
You know, and let me know if you need help once you start working
bitching
through
about it and go do something.
So, and then too, I mean, it's just for me, a lot of times too, it comes down to opportunity costs. So am I willing to commit the time I think it's going to take, or can I submit something else that can give me that time back? Like, if I have a problem in the yard, is it something that I want to fix, or am I willing to just go ahead and pay Felipe, my guy that works in the yard, $150 to do it for me?
Yeah.
Right. So you find ways to mitigate it if you have the flexibility to do that.
With the sprinkler situation, it came down to money.
Yeah.
Really. It wasn't necessarily emergent that I fix it today. I asked my landscaper, you know, what's going on? First of all, let's diagnose the problem. And when we did, he says, it's going to be $175 per valve. And I got 3 valves.
That's expensive.
Like, dude, I can get those valves for $30 at Lowe's.
Yeah.
It cost me about 20 minutes of my time to change them.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
We had Tang Robinson on. Tang and I have had this conversation in the break room. When it comes to doing stuff like that, it comes down to skill, will, and time.
Yep.
And if you have all 3 of those, go do it yourself.
Yeah.
If you're missing any one of those 3,
that's a great way to break it down.
Probably looking to pay somebody else to do it.
Absolutely.
Skill, will, and time.
Yeah.
So I saved myself $400 and however many dollars, and it cost me an hour out of my day on a Saturday morning, but I got it fixed and I moved on.
Yeah. That's valid.
Yep.
What else you got, man?
I don't know. We're moving into kind of the later portions of the book where it started getting really dry. And
that's all I had, because systems of opportunity is, again, it's more about how you build a system of opportunity around you. We've talked a lot about opportunity and collaborate. Like, we talked a lot about the social awareness piece and how to tie that into, your work environment and things like that when we talked through emotional intelligence. So I felt like that system of opportunity piece was focused more on kind of groups and organizations, and not necessarily individual aspects.
And that's where, that's where I would say for anybody who's maybe looking to read this book, up to this point, up to part 3, it's good.
Yeah.
All right. Maybe not the first one that I would recommend to people, but when you get into part 3 down here, he starts looking at systems versus individual. And in the vein that we're talking about here, it's more of an individual thing. So while there are good takeaways in that section, I probably wouldn't lean into that. I would look for some other books that are more focused on the individual and how you can move out.
Yep. Yeah. Basically, I have 3 notes under systems of opportunity. It's not about winner takes all. It's about building a system of opportunity around it. We talk about the 5. We've talked about how to create opportunity, the value of mentorship, all that stuff. Collaborate and learn from people around you. Be part of the team. We've hammered that a million times. And dudes, learn how to fucking listen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Something else I suck at.
Especially when you're young, don't be rolling into meetings thinking you've got it all figured the fuck out. Because 9 times out of 10, you don't have the same amount of information that the people above you do. And there's probably information that you may have gapped. So take before you start to spout and think that you have all the answers, ask some questions and listen first and make sure that you have all the information that you really need. It's that whole know your role, shut your hole, never miss the opportunity, shut the fuck up, know your place.
We got exposed to this so many times though, through like being a package lead or being a mission commander or something like that, where, dude, you might be one of the smartest people in the room and you might be put on that pedestal because of your talents and your gifts and your abilities. But when it comes to solving a problem that big, dude, you got to lean on you
Yeah.
got to lean into other people.
You
man.
have package commanders for a reason.
You got to lean into other people. And like, coming from a Strike You world, I didn't know the first fucking thing about seed.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd read it in the book and I generally knew how this was supposed to work and integrate into my plan and everything. But guess what? Cass, you're the expert, bro.
Yeah.
Go build me a good seed plan. Come back to me in an hour. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's figure out how we insert that in here and figure it out with the tanker game plan and all this other stuff.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
So while you may have your piece figured out, there's always going to be other areas of that that are going to.
There's other aspects that you're unaware of.
It'll be illuminated to you through asking some questions and saying what if and things like that.
Absolutely.
Kid was talking about the same thing in the astronaut program. You got 4 people going up in a capsule,
and they have very specific roles.
Each one of them has their role and their responsibility. And he said it was very humbling for him to come in with 4,000 hours of flight time and a whole bunch of different aircraft, and he goes, I'm just the pilot.
Yeah.
I'm just giving you guys a ride to space. That's it. That's my role in the team.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it, right? Yeah. And I'm in my lane, by the way.
Yeah. It's great that you're growing cannabis in space, but I'm just going to take us off and land us.
That's right. That's awesome. All right, brother, what else you got?
Nothing, man.
All right.
That's a good one.
Be the change.
All right, be the one. Thanks for flying with the Be One Change One podcast. If you got something out of this show, then be the one and share it in your circles of influence.
You can be our wingman through our website at www.be1change1.com. That's B and the number 1, change and the number 1.com.
We invite you to be the one and join our fighter squadron on social media at Be1Change1 on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can follow us at Paul Roscoe White on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as Roscoe's website, www.paulroscoewhite.com.
You can email us from the website and please leave comments, share, and ask questions, or leave ideas of things you would like to discuss on future podcasts. Most importantly, be the one that helps us win the algorithm by leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening on.
Thanks for joining. Until next time, be the one.